Hey there viewers, what started as a weird freezer auction turned into a trail of blood vials, fake vocals, and files so cold they sing back. But now, the feds are involved. Beyonce's secrets are leaking, and Blue Ivy might have left the back door open. Let's talk about what they found, because some voices weren't meant to thaw. Chapter 1. Lot 44B, the ice locker nobody wanted. Borsch, Sinta, Kornin. The ice locker. 1. I've been picking through liquidation auctions for 6 years now. Not fancy estate sales or storage lockers from TV shows. Real gritty stuff. Government seizures, abandoned logistics facilities, repossessed DJ gear from busted clubs. You'd be surprised what people stop showing up to claim when they're going to prison, or when they disappear entirely. And that's where I come in. I've flipped broken fog machines, piles of LED panels, even a full churro stand once, but I never thought I'd end up bidding on a freezer so cold it had its own warning sign. The U.S. Marshals held the auction in this dingy warehouse, near Gardena, industrial block, unheated. Most of the lots were standard, crypto mining rigs with tamper tags, DJ booths with cracked glass, club furniture wrapped in plastic. I came for a pallet of used gimbals, easy resale. I didn't even notice Lot 44B at first. It was tucked behind 2 gutted arcade cabinets and a shipping crate full of counterfeit speakers, but it made itself known. The cold coming off it was unreal. I mean, yes, I've handled industrial units before, walk-ins, sub-zero meat lockers, but this thing was giving off fog. Actual wisps of icy vapors sliding across the concrete floor like dry ice from a movie set. It wasn't plugged in. At least it shouldn't have been. There was a laminated warning sign taped on the door. Do not touch. Thermal burn. Risk. And under that, in red Sharpie, someone had scribbled, still active, powerful, retention. That got my attention. It was stainless steel, seamless finish, reinforced door bolts, not your average restaurant surplus. The lot tag read, Lot 44B, origin, undisclosed, Bel Air, California, seized sedum, no opening on premise, handling gloves required, no brand logo, no thermostat dial, just this flat, almost mirrored surface that shimmered slightly, like it had a second skin. One of the warehouse staff was misting the exterior every half hour with a garden sprayer. I asked him why. He said if they didn't, the metal started frosting up bad enough to burn through gloves. He showed me a photo on his phone, someone's palm with a deep white print in the shape of a hexagon. Not frostbite, a perfect hex. I didn't know what to say to that, so I just nodded and kept my distance. The bidding started around noon. There were 20 of us gathered near the rolling door. I expected the usual haggling, contractors trying to undercut each other for bulk items. But when Lot 44B came up, the tone shifted. People got quiet. The auctioneer read the lot description twice, slower the second time. Only 2 people raised their paddles, and a man in a gray windbreaker with a clipboard and sunglasses, indoors. No company name, no bidder number visible. The staff called him Ice House. That's not a joke, his tag actually said. Ice House LLC. We went back and forth. 4,000, 4,200, 4,400. I was about to back down. I mean, come on. I didn't need a mystery popsicle from Bel Air. But just before I could lower my paddle, the man in gray shook his head and walked off. No counterbid, no eye contact, just turned and left. I won it for $4,450. The forklift crew wasn't thrilled. They spent 20 minutes prying it off its wood skid without direct contact. When they finally shifted it onto my rented flatbed, I saw it along the underside, where the forks scraped a corner clean. There was a second seam, a kind of latch, partially bent. It wasn't just a freezer. It was a freezer inside a freezer. That night, I parked the unit inside a rented storage bay, rolled the door down, sat in my truck for 15 minutes just staring at the cargo from behind the glass. I kept thinking about the bill of lading stapled to the crate. It wasn't government formatted, looked custom printed. It had only 2 prior destinations before seizure: Arctic Recovery Solutions, Dallas, Texas; Levi's Pop-Up Activation Trade Room, West Hollywood, California. That second one was so bizarre, I actually Googled it. Turns out, Beyonce had done a Levi's denim commercial in April where she literally walks into a diner fridge to pick out a jacket. Whole viral thing. People joked online she was refrigerated to perfection. But why would this freezer, tagged as seized federal evidence, have been there? And what kind of equipment does a clothing pop-up need with cryo capacity? I made a mental note to dig into that later. For now, I needed to power it on. That's when things got weird again. I ran a standard extension cord from the wall outlet and plugged it in using an adapter. No click, no hum, just a small green diode lit up on the base. But here's the thing, the temperature didn't change. It was already cold. -11 degrees Celsius. I verified it with my IR thermometer. I shut it off. Checked the plug. Even unplugged, the walls still read -11. After 3 hours, that should be impossible, unless there's phase change material inside, or a passive coolant with long duration hold. But even those need recharge cycles. I'd seen medical freezers used for vaccines. None held this kind of temp on standby. It was like this thing had its own cold logic. I didn't sleep that night. I kept refreshing old liquidation boards, trying to see if anyone had heard of Ice House LLC. Nothing. No online presence. No California registry. Just this one ghost bidder who vanished the second the price tipped over $4,400. $4,400. What? 44.7. -11 Celsius. My brain was starting to draw lines where there might be none. But something felt off, like I'd bought into something that wanted to be bought, like a whole auction had been staged just to see who'd go past a price point. By morning, the unit was still cold, still fogging around the seams, and when I walked behind it to check for damage from the forklift, I saw the real surprise. Near the compressor housing, just under a mesh panel, there was a hairline fracture. The forklift had peeled the edge back just enough to show another door inside. Smaller, matte black, flush-mounted like a safe, and right where the handle should be, there was a broken ring of glass and melted epoxy. Maybe where a fingerprint reader used to be. I didn't have the tools to crack that open, and honestly, I wasn't even sure I wanted to. The resale value of the compressors alone could get me out of debt. I told myself I'd strip it, flip the shell, and forget the whole thing. But that second door wouldn't leave me alone. Why install a biometric lock inside a freezer? Who needs that level of security on something that's already too cold to casually enter? Unless whatever was inside wasn't just about keeping out. It was about keeping in. Later that afternoon, while loading gear into the truck, a guy in an unmarked white van rolled up to the facility gate, said he was looking for lot 44. Didn't say B, just 44. Claimed he was sent by a client to verify delivery. I asked which company he worked for. He said he wasn't at liberty to say. Just handed me a card with no name. Just a logo of a single blue cube. I didn't say anything, just shrugged and said, "The auction ended yesterday." He drove off. No plates. I didn't tell anyone else about it, not even my sister, and we usually talk about everything. I don't know why. Maybe part of me already knew this wasn't something I could explain. Not with a receipt. Not with a Google search. Not even with the photos I took of the frost trails pooling under the bay door. At night, I lay in bed thinking about Beyonce's fridge commercial, about the Levi's shoot, about why someone would keep a freezer this cold for this long, and why it hadn't melted at all in transport, and most of all, why a man from a company that doesn't exist walked away the moment the price hit $4,400. As if that number meant something, as if the whole sale was a test I wasn't supposed to pass. I didn't know it yet, But that second door behind the steel wasn't locked anymore. Something had already started to thaw. Chapter 2. First thaw. The things we aren't supposed to defrost. It was the quiet that got to me first. The unit had been in my possession for 3 days, and I still hadn't dared to open the inner door. I'd set it up in a rented mini warehouse just off the 110 freeway. Concrete walls, steel roll-up door. Nothing fancy. The air in there was always stale, heavy with dust and motor oil from whoever had the bay before me, but around the freezer it was clean. Cold, but clean. Like the machine somehow pushed everything else away, sound included. I didn't even hear my own footsteps when I walked near it anymore. That morning I came in determined to crack it open. I didn't care about the resale anymore. Something about the second door had gotten under my skin. It didn't feel like just a vault or a cooler. It felt intentional, like a dare. I started by examining the latch again. The forklift damage had done more than I realized. There was a shallow bend in the casing, and right near the edge I saw it, a recessed notch, about the width of a quarter and lined with what looked like black silicone. I didn't have the original biometric pad, obviously, but when I pressed into the recess with the side of a screwdriver, I heard a soft mechanical click. Nothing dramatic happened, no hiss, no unlock chime, but after a second, a small green LED lit up on the inner seam of the freezer wall. It pulsed once, then flickered into 3 solid letters. Retiv. I stared at it, not sure what to make of it. At first I assumed it meant revision 4 or something techie like that, but then it hit me. I'd seen that exact phrase before, not just online, but in a Reddit thread about Beyonce's recording sessions back in 2019. There were rumors she had unlocked a supposed 4th vocal register that only appeared in post-production files. Some producers swore they heard frequencies layered into her vocals that didn't match any standard human vocal classification. The files were tagged REVI. People said it was pitch cloning. Others said it was studio wizardry. But the weirdest ones claimed it wasn't her voice at all. That what we heard was a fabricated layer, a patch of synthetic vocal cords mapped onto her natural tone. I always thought it was fan conspiracy garbage, but here it was, blinking at me from a freezer I bought for $4,400. I stood there, sweating in a jacket, cold fog swirling at my knees. After a few moments, I decided I couldn't stare at it forever. I wedged a crowbar into the seal where the latch clicked and gently leaned into it. The door didn't resist. In fact, it opened smoother than I expected, like it had been waiting for someone to try. Behind it was a narrow corridor lined with metal racks, all bathed in soft blue light. It wasn't sterile or white like a medical fridge. It looked more like a server bay crossed with a morgue drawer room. The air smelled like oxidized copper and bleach, and my breath turned to mist immediately. There were drawers, maybe 30, each labeled with code names, Laren XB or 22D. Not thanked 4.4. I stared at that last one for a long time. Not thanked. That phrase had only one context if you followed pop culture closely. Beyonce's fans had been obsessing over her thank you lists for more than a decade. Artists who didn't get name-dropped in the liner notes of her albums often saw strange drops in their careers, vanishing from the scene, losing deals, or in some cases suffering tragic ends. It became a joke on Twitter. Don't cross her, don't be unthanked. But this label wasn't a joke. It wasn't a tweet. It was engraved into a steel drawer at -11 degrees Celsius. I pulled on the handle. It didn't open, but I noticed a rubber seal along the edge and a micro ID slot at the side. Probably needed a passcard. I tried another drawer. Laren XB gave way with a low hiss. Inside was a cryo canister, small, cylindrical, about the size of a protein shaker bottle. Clear sides filled with translucent liquid and floating in the center, a soft, fleshy object. At first I thought it was a sponge or some kind of biogel, but the shape was too precise. It had folds, soft ridges, like the surface of a vocal cord. A printed label inside the container read, "Harvested, 11 April 2023, Atlantis, Dubai, Session A1." And the lid, Atlantis, Dubai. That was her performance after years off the stage. People paid millions to attend. And there'd been a strange rumor circulating right after. Something about audio engineers noticing an unusual echo trail in her high notes. They said it sounded like there was a duplicate voice layered under her live vocals. Not a backing track, a shadow tone. I slid the canister back into place and shut the drawer. The next drawer I tried had something even worse. It wasn't medical, it was food. Or at least, it was labeled that way. A stack of vacuum-sealed 22 days nutrition boxes sat on frosted shelves, perfectly lined. Each had a printed delivery date, 1 week ago. The seals weren't broken. They looked like any of the vegan meal kits I'd seen from her wellness brand. Lentil protein bars, grain bowls, spirulina smoothies, but mixed between the boxes were small plastic vials, capped and frozen solid. Each was labeled with codes I couldn't decipher. One had a barcode, another said glucred/NE, and a date that was only 4 days old, and all of them were red. Not orange, not pink, deep blood red. It hit me like a drop of ice water to the chest. They were blood samples, dozens, stored right next to packaged food. Like this was normal, like someone had intended this layout to look routine. I stepped back. I didn't know what I was looking at anymore. Part of me thought this had to be some elite biotesting setup, maybe a research fridge, something meant for athletic monitoring, vocal recovery, even anti-aging therapy. But none of that explained the other drawer. I almost didn't open it. The drawer was frozen shut at the bottom corner. I had to wedge it with a metal ruler and tap it loose with the handle of the crowbar. Inside, folded gently and frozen stiff, was a child-sized choir robe, bright white, small embroidered cross at the collar, mid-thigh length. The fabric had frozen in a swirl as if someone had just spun out of it and vanished. There was no tag, no hanger. It wasn't on a mannequin, just laying in a drawer like it had been left behind. I backed out of the freezer completely, slammed the outer door, stumbled outside and sat on the cold concrete floor of the warehouse with my hands on my knees. I tried to ground myself. Looked up old blog posts about Beyonce's team and storage rumors. Found an article on tropagalia.net and another on Showbiz Cheat Sheet, both mentioning a supposed off-site temperature-controlled digital archive that stored all her unreleased footage, diaries, and studio backups. Fans had speculated there was also a media freezer used to keep master recordings and rare physical film reels safe from entropy. But this wasn't just media. This was biological. This was organ level. I couldn't shake the image of the robe. I didn't know if it had been used in a performance. I didn't even know if it had ever belonged to a real child. But something about the way it was folded, the creases, the swirl at the hem. Look, paused, like a freeze frame from a moment too fast to catch. I didn't sleep again that night. Instead, I pulled out an old hard drive dock and tried plugging in one of the SSDs I found wedged behind the food boxes. It was frost-burned around the edges, casing cracked. But the disks spun up. Inside were folders, dozens of them, mostly video files, some labeled with Parkwood project names, some with timestamps. One folder had nothing but silence, long silent wave files. But when I loaded one into an audio program, the waveform wasn't flat. It had rhythm, movement, hidden modulation. And then it hit me. This wasn't silence. I was counting, faint, layered, high-pitched voices, children counting, slowly in time. I shut my laptop and sat in the dark. Whatever this freezer was built to preserve, It wasn't ready to stay that way. Chapter 3. Sub-Zero Clause, How a Room Temp Discrepancy Triggered a Federal Warrant. The story doesn't start with me this time. It doesn't even start with the freezer. It starts with a temperature request, 72 degrees Fahrenheit. That number was buried inside a hospitality rider, one of those behind-the-scenes documents that outlines what a performer wants backstage. Everything from stage towels to lighting gels to snacks. Most people never see those unless they work on tour crews or spend too much time on Reddit. But the 2013 version of Beyonce's rider was leaked after a European promoter accidentally attached it to an invoice. It asked for the dressing rooms to be kept at exactly 72 degrees Fahrenheit. Not 73, not 71, 72. It became a talking point for a few weeks. People mocked it online, called it diva behavior. But tour insiders knew it wasn't unusual. Big stars get precise. It's their way of maintaining control in the chaos. At the time, it was just a footnote. Until 3 years later, in 2016, a separate version of the rider surfaced. This one was never leaked to the public. It was obtained during a quiet audit by a private venue security firm in Los Angeles, filed under a routine backstage certification inspection. The temperature had changed. Now the request was 78 degrees Fahrenheit, 6 degrees hotter. That single detail, innocuous to most, raised a flag for a former auditor named Wesley Grant. He'd worked with large-scale hospitality compliance contracts and had a background in thermodynamics. And he knew something that most people didn't. When you're dealing with high-performance vocal work, 6 degrees matters. Warmer temperatures relax vocal cords. But if you're known for perfection, and if your historical profile has demanded cooler environments, this kind of shift wasn't a preference, it was a compensation. He filed an internal note in a hospitality risk log. Nothing major, just flagged it for future venue prep. But the note sat on a shared drive, and by 2018 it had been imported into a pattern recognition software used by a defense subcontractor under a FEMA grant. The software didn't just monitor weather changes or crowd movement. It looked for infrared irregularities during mass audience events, and Beyonce's shows were ideal test cases. The FEMA team was originally tasked with mapping thermal behavior across high-density areas in LA in case of earthquake displacement. But when they overlaid their heat map on a 3D rendering of the Bel Air hillside, they found something strange. Under her property line, right beneath what looked like a wine cellar, was a dark spot, a cold signature, -20 degrees Celsius, in a zone that had no listed utility structure. At first, they assumed it was an error, maybe a glitch in the drone's sensor, so they ran it again, this time with 2 drones. Same result. A consistent cold shadow roughly 24 feet long by 6 feet wide, tapering into the hillside. No HVAC permits had been filed for the area. No sub-basement listed in the tax records. That's when a FEMA analyst named Carla Prieto submitted a quiet inquiry to the Department of Energy's Environmental Diagnostics Task Force. She wrote, "I believe we've found an unregistered cryo unit buried in a residential structure, requesting analysis under Sub-Zero Clause protocol." Now that clause wasn't something you'd find in public documents. It's buried deep in the Controlled Substance Storage Compliance Framework, something usually only relevant to private labs or tissue banks. It allows for the immediate investigation of any refrigeration system that exceeds medical-grade cold storage thresholds without appropriate DEA licensing. But the warrant couldn't just materialize overnight. They needed a second trigger. They found it in the utility logs. In 2021, a backdated report from the Bel Air Power Consortium was reviewed as part of a regional energy optimization project. The data showed an anomaly. Beyonce's property logged consistent 2-megawatt power surges during specific windows, between 2 a.m. and 5 a.m., exclusively on tour off days. The spikes didn't match air conditioning loads. They didn't match pool equipment, car charging stations, or lighting systems, and they weren't public. Someone had blacked out the line items before the logs were filed with the energy board. But the unfiltered backups remained on an internal grid monitor used for wildfire modeling. That's how they got pulled. The math didn't lie. 2 megawatts for 3 hours? That was enough to power a meat-packing facility, or flash freeze a human-sized biological mass. Combined with the thermal drone footage, the temperature rider shift, and the energy spikes, the file was handed off to a multi-agency task force under a classification header labeled Rev VIV/4411, Tier Freeze. Still, it wasn't enough for public action until the email leak. In late 2023, someone leaked an internal thread from Parkwood Entertainment's stage design division. The emails weren't about storage, they were about logistics for the Renaissance tour. But one message, buried in a subfolder of scaffolding approvals, referred to a cryo shelf refit behind curtain B and a request for biostabilizer rails rated for 4.4. Nobody knew what that meant, but the number 4.4 started buzzing through channels that don't officially exist. The same ones that handled pharmaceutical raids, synthetic organ transport rings, and illegal stem cell trafficking cases. Then came the final tip. Sous chef, an anonymous contractor who had worked a private reception near Beyonce's Malibu property, reported being instructed not to use the main walk-in cooler. Instead, he was told to place all perishables inside a mobile catering unit parked outside. When he asked why, a Parkwood assistant told him, "You're not cleared for internal refrigeration." He didn't think much of it at first, but 2 days later he claimed he was followed after work. Same black SUV, 3 different nights. No plates, so he went to the LAPD. They redirected him, and someone else listened. On January 11, 2024, a federal warrant was issued under Code Item 44A. It authorized the immediate seizure of any refrigeration or cryogenic containment unit operating below -10 degrees Celsius, housed in an unpermitted residential area, exceeding medical-grade volume parameters, and unregistered with the Department of Energy or Drug Enforcement Administration. Exceptions included runaways, refusals, abhorrence, or abandon. The address was redacted on the first draft, but when the second revision was released via FOIA leak 6 months later, the location was listed clearly: 9601 Mandeville Canyon Road, Bel Air, California. That's when the internet exploded. Conspiracy channels coined it Coldgate. Reddit threads mapped out every known rider leak from Beyonce's tours. YouTube videos compared her 2013 stage sweat levels to her 2016 ones. TikTok users speculated that the cold wasn't for preservation, it was for mutation. Cloning rumors resurfaced. The Revive tag got plastered on everything. Some claimed she'd been replaced years ago, that the real Beyonce hadn't sung live since 2018. Others said she had stored vocal samples from past performances and looped them through new performances via AI-generated enhancements. But the weirdest theory came from a blogger on a dead site called Echo Frame. They wrote that cold air wasn't just for slowing decay. It was for stopping echoes. That whatever was inside her vault wasn't alive. It was recorded, and it needed to be kept at sub-zero to stop it from bleeding into the rest of the world. That same blog was deleted 3 days later. The federal raid itself was never televised. No headlines, no helicopters, just a line item in a property lien filing from a quiet judge in San Luis Obispo County. All assets labeled under Parkwood's subterranean lease were forfeited, and that included the freezer, Lot 44B, which ended up on a warehouse floor in Gardena, which I bought for $4,400, which was now sitting in a rented storage unit with something still beating softly under the ice. Chapter 4. The samples sing back. I should have known not to plug it in, but after what I'd seen, drawers labeled with strange codes, child-sized choir robes frozen mid-twirl, vials of deep red plasma mixed with meal kits. I wasn't sleeping much anyway, so I set up what I could call a clean room in the warehouse bay. It wasn't professional by any stretch, just a folding table, a few dust sheets tacked over the fluorescent lights, a cheap HEPA filter fan from a beauty supply store, and my old Lenovo laptop that still booted into offline Linux. I wore nitrile gloves, even though nothing inside the freezer looked infectious, just wrong. Like these things weren't meant to be seen outside a lab or a vault. The SSD I'd pulled from the back of the drawer was still ringed with frost. The plastic casing was cracked at the seams, like it had tried to expand and contract too many times. I dried it gently with a microfiber cloth and slotted it into a USB dock. At first, nothing happened. Then the power light blinked once, and the speaker on my laptop popped. Just a faint thump, like a vinyl needle dropping. I hadn't even opened an audio player, but the disc auto-mount and launched a waveform preview window I'd never seen before. It was long, 22 minutes exactly. Sample rate, 11,025 Hz. Bith, 24-bit mono. Final hope, 44. Revbang.mix, no metadata. The waveform looked harmless at first, just a sawtoothed rhythm with occasional peaks. But when I played it, the air in the room changed. It wasn't noise, it was children, soft voices. Counting. Bomb. 2, 3, in perfect unison. The tempo was slow, about 40 beats per minute. Each syllable stretched and soaked in reverb like they were inside a cavern or a cathedral. The pitch was high but not chipmunked, natural, human but not joyful. The longer it played, the more it shifted. Around the 4-minute mark, the harmony began to bend. The kids weren't just counting anymore. They were overlapping, layered slightly off time, like staggered echoes, but not delayed, deliberate. Minor key harmony. Some notes strayed into dissonance. 9, 10, 11, R, 10, and just like that, the pitch dipped, like a fader had been dragged down slowly until every voice fell to this icy, hollow register that made the metal walls of the freezer behind me vibrate. I stopped the track. My laptop fan was whining like it was overheating, which didn't make sense. There was no visual file rendering, no plugins running, just audio, basic, raw waveform. Still, I needed to see it clearer. I dragged the file into an old spectral analysis app I had saved from a college project years ago. It displayed sound as image, color bands representing frequencies and amplitude over time. At first, it looked like a standard vocal map. You could see the peaks and valleys of each word, each breath. But then I zoomed out. The whole thing shifted. The waveform, when compressed and viewed from end to end, formed a shape, a no-go. I didn't recognize it immediately, but something about the outline felt familiar. Curved lines, radiating from a central spine, sharp peaks at 3 points like stylized wings. I pulled up a photo of Beyonce's Renaissance tour insignia from a fan wiki. Identical. Same arc, same angles. The kids' voices had been sculpted to fit that shape, not remixed after the fact. Engineered into the sonic structure. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the freezer. I slammed the laptop closed and stepped away. This wasn't a demo. It was a signature. I needed air, but before I left, I looked at one of the vials again. The ones I'd assumed were blood. I held it up to the light, and for the first time, noticed a thin label underneath the main barcode. There was a tiny black square, a biotag. I'd seen them before, in a YouTube video about medical sample tracking. RFID and donated, usually scanned with a dedicated reader. I didn't have one, but I had a phone. And there were apps that could pick up low-frequency NFC signals. I downloaded one, turned on scan mode, and held my phone against the vial. The screen blinked once. Editorial. Source. Larynx VF-BIY. BA1. Date. April 19, 2023. Section type. Vocal fold. Biopsy. Event. Atlantis Dubai Live Performance Track 4/7. I dropped the vial. Atlantis Dubai, that private concert from last year. The one where tickets cost 6 figures and phones were confiscated at the door. Rumors had swirled about the set list being unreleased, about her voice sounding not human on certain runs. And now I was holding physical proof that her vocal cords had been sampled days before the event. Not metaphorically. Medically, the counting started playing again. Not from the laptop. From inside the freezer, muffled, but audible. The hum of layered childlike voices, pressing against the sealed metal like breath against glass. I wasn't sure if I was imagining it, but I knew I had to document it, so I took out my phone, hit record, and captured 10 seconds of the counting sound through the steel. When I played it back, the video had no sound. Muted completely. I uploaded it to a dummy TikTok account I used to test viral trends. Nothing in the caption, just the freezer and 10 seconds of ambient space. It posted, and 5 minutes later my DMs blew up. Strangers, private accounts, no profile pics, one after another. What did you do to my AirPods? The audio won't stop, even when I close the app. My headphones are cold, like actually cold. What is this? You hear the loop at 11. That last one froze me. I replayed the original file on my laptop and dragged the cursor to the end. The final fade out hit exactly -11 decibels, the same number as the freezer's static temperature, 11 degrees Celsius. Coincidence? Or the threshold, the echo line where sound became freeze and freeze became signal? I checked the TikTok post again, but thousands of viewers claimed they could hear it anyway. Some said their phone speakers had started playing white noise hours later. Others said their fridge ice makers began clinking in rhythm. One user sent a screen recording showing their smart assistant lighting up every time the file hit the 7-minute mark, even though nothing was playing. I didn't respond to any of them. Instead, I turned off the lights, sat in the cold, and stared at the freezer. The samples weren't just archived, they were singing, not into the air, not into ears, but into something deeper, colder, a system we weren't supposed to access, a format we weren't meant to hear, and they weren't finished. Chapter 5. Blood Sugar Sessions. I didn't go looking for lab reports. I was just trying to figure out what this freezer really was. What kind of person even builds something like this? I'd already seen too much. Cryo canisters labeled with larynx samples, vials of blood frozen right next to vegan meal kits, a child's choir robe, frozen mid-spawn, like someone vanished out of it. But what I found next? This was something else. It started with one of the older SSDs. The casing was cracked around the edges and half fused from frost damage. I didn't even expect it to boot, but it mounted, just barely, and opened a folder called Revarg. That part felt familiar. I'd already seen the name Revive flash on the freezer's internal system. Most of the files inside looked like sound data, multi-track sessions, plug-in presets, vocal chains, all the things you'd expect from a professional music archive. But buried deeper, inside a subfolder called S2_FMS RAW, were spreadsheets. Clean formatting, cold, clinical. The columns listed things like draw ID, blood glucose, tissue color index, hold temp, sample site, slot ID. At first, I didn't get it. I figured it was just performance data for vocal sessions, maybe some advanced vocal health tracking. Then I noticed the glucose levels. They weren't normal. One entry read 248 milligrams per deciliter. Another was higher, 281. I looked it up. Normal fasting glucose is supposed to be between 70 and 100. Even post-meal, you shouldn't be anywhere near 200. Why would someone freeze blood samples with that much sugar in them? There was a note at the bottom of one spreadsheet. It read, elevated glucose preserves tone fidelity in epithelial matrix. Shelf life confirmed at 4.4 times baseline. Sample retains harmonic integrity under minus 11 degrees Celsius for 11-day intervals. Elevated depth of moments with tone can be preserved for minus 3.6 intervals, like 3 days. Tones are absorbed at a low. I just sat there reading it over and over. Tone fidelity, harmonic integrity. This wasn't about health. They were preserving sound, using sugar-rich plasma to stabilize tissue. That's when it hit me. I'd heard something like this before, not in science journals, in conspiracy threads, late-night YouTube deep dives, stories about blood rituals, about so-called sweet blood that's high in adrenaline and glucose. People talked about it like it was myth, elite blood harvesting. The adrenochrome stuff. They always thought it was nonsense. Now here I was, looking at charts that made it feel real, and it didn't stop there. A few folders over, I found internal documents, not spreadsheets, emails, Parkwood letterhead, confidential threads between engineers and project leads. One subject line read, Vocal Continuity Program, Phase B, Notes. The thread included phrases I didn't recognize at first. Things like stem line injection, VF clone batching, overlay layering, but one sentence stood out. Fourth. There won't be live lead with layering. PR. Revealing high blood, match effort, and 81.2% pitch integrity. Over live use with layering. They were cloning vocal cords, not metaphorically, literally taking biopsies, cutting into vocal folds, and regrowing them in some lab. Then using those pieces to rebuild tones, matching live vocals with artificial backups, so seamless even live shows could include overlays without detection. Long men looked healthy, yet all men looked. This wasn't just sound design. This was biological duplication. I stood up from the table and had to walk away. The back of my neck was damp and cold, and just like that, I remembered an article I'd skimmed months ago. It was about Jay-Z and his investments in meat alternatives. A writer, Sidney Urbanek, I think, had mentioned how his cold chain logistics with Impossible Foods had scaled up quickly and oddly out of proportion for the business model. It made me wonder, what if the trucks weren't delivering food? What if they were moving something else? I went back into the files. One of the PDFs showed shipping manifests labeled food service/health. Routes ran from a facility in Van Nuys straight to a location called Bel Air Access Terminal 11. The weight logs were strange. Every pallet weighed roughly 38 pounds. Too light for bulk food. Too specific to be random. Exactly the right size for biological material and cold containment. It all fit. The blood, the tissue, the freezer, and now the infrastructure. I sat back down and clicked through one last folder labeled Slot Map, Sub-Zero Overlay. It was hand-drawn, a scan of a paper map with drawer labels scribbled out. Each box had an ID, larynx B, core 22D, tonal C1, and more. But there was something different in the second column. Next to most slots were initials, names, tags, but under the drawers labeled Not Thanked 4.4, there were no names, just a red stamp across each one that said, Unstabilized. That phrase made me feel sick. I remembered Beyonce's album credits. Fans have obsessed for years over who she thanks, who she doesn't. Artists would get publicly rattled if their names didn't show up. Some would disappear from the music scene after that. Some just dropped off the face of the earth. It became an online joke. Don't get unthanked. But looking at this map, the joke wasn't funny anymore. These drawers weren't empty. They were caution zones. One of the slots, A4, had a date scrawled next to it. September 4th, 2023, her birthday. I checked that drawer. Inside was nothing. No vial, no sample. But the metal lining was smeared with faint marks, streaks that didn't look like machine scratches. They curved downward, like fingertips dragging condensation, like something had been there and left. The next file I opened just sealed it. It was a personnel memo titled Post-Tour Voice Risk Management. One paragraph, read, for high-fidelity support, consider extraction from Session B backups for any departing vocal staff. Priority preservation for tone match. Notify HR of any post-tour instability reports. I remembered a rumor from years back. A singer who toured briefly with Beyonce, then went dark. No press, no farewell post, just vanished. She posted once, just a photo with a caption that read, "See them, we took more than my mic." Deleted hours later. Nobody talked about it again. That was when I realized this wasn't a single machine in a warehouse. This was part of a system, a sound preservation loop. A loop built on real people, their real voices, and maybe their silence. The samples weren't just backups. They were insurance. Chapter 6. Blue's breadcrumbs. I found the lunchbox by accident. I wasn't digging for more secrets. I was actually trying to back away. The files, the plasma samples, the whispers of larynx cloning, it was all too much. I'd started locking the freezer each night, stacking crates in front of it like that would somehow hold back whatever cold logic was swirling inside. But the deeper I tried to bury it, the more it reached back for me. I came in one morning and noticed one of the drawers was slightly ajar, not the medical drawers. A utility panel near the base, something I hadn't noticed before. It must have shifted during transport, or maybe the frost had finally weakened the lock. When I bent down and opened it, I expected tools or spare wiring. But instead, sitting there like it had been carefully wedged behind the metal lining, was a small, pink lunchbox. Plastic. Glitter-coated, handle cracked, the kind of thing a 7-year-old might carry to school. There was handwriting on it, in silver glitter pen. Across the lid it read, "For Mom, save me a stage. B.I." I didn't breathe for a few seconds. B.I. There was no way. Blue Ivy. I held it in my hands and stared at it like it might vanish. It felt real. It was real. Stickers had peeled off the sides. Stars, little music notes, a faint outline of what looked like a microphone. But what stuck with me most was the handwriting. It wasn't neat. It was rushed, like a kid trying to get a message out before someone took the pen away. I opened the lid, empty. No note, no toy, just a bit of glitter dust at the bottom. But someone had packed it like it meant something, like it was supposed to be found. And that's when I started thinking, maybe Blue Ivy knew, or worse, maybe she'd helped build it. I took the lunchbox back to the clean room, set it beside the SSDs. I didn't want to look at it, but I couldn't stop staring. I kept thinking about all the times she'd appeared in Beyonce's performances, not just standing near her mom, but mirroring her, moving in sync, holding the mic, singing the parts. Almost like she'd been trained for it, groomed. I went back to the encrypted drives. I'd left one untouched, a partition labeled ICE. The folder was locked, password protected, no hints. I tried standard guesses, Rev, BULIVIY, Blue Ivy, but nothing worked. After 5 tries, the screen flashed a warning. 3 attempts remaining, freeze lock will engage. I paused. Freeze lock. This wasn't just digital security. The drive had physical measures too. Probably some kind of auto-wipe trigger that would activate if I got it wrong again. Then I remembered something weird I'd seen a few days earlier. One of those TikTok conspiracy pages that dove into celebrity numerology. They had this post about how Beyonce's birthday was September 4th and Blue Ivy's was January 7th. Together, they made up the number 1111, XI's Roman numerals. I typed it in. A live exa. The folder opened. Inside was a single file, At WGIF, barely a few megabytes. I clicked it, but at first, nothing, just a still frame. Blue Ivy standing inside the Levi's fridge, set from that old commercial. Wearing a silver coat, one hand on the fridge door, the other pointing towards something off-screen. Then she blinked, a slow, exaggerated wink. And as she did, a frost pattern began to spread across the image, creeping in from the edges, swallowing her face, then her body, until the whole frame was coated in digital ice. His screen froze. I tried to close the player, but my cursor wouldn't move. The program didn't crash. It just stayed there, humming. Once again. Then a new folder appeared on the desktop. Floorplan_44. Inside was a scanned blueprint, low resolution, grainy, but I recognized the name in the bottom corner. Parkwood Entertainment Structural Basement Lamp. It wasn't a music facility. It was a freezer map, 11 rooms, all underground, each marked with temperature symbols, all below freezing. And every one had a tag that matched the drawers I'd seen. Larix B Core 22D, not Thought 4.4. But what chilled me most was the center chamber. It was marked B stage. I didn't understand at first, but then I remembered the message on the lunchbox. Save me a stage, not get me on a stage, not build me one. Save me one, like she'd been promised a space. Or locked into it. The question started burning in my mind. Was Blue Ivy leaving me a trail, or leading me into a trap? I thought about that Levi's ad again. How weird it was. Her mom climbing into a walk-in fridge like it was a closet. Fans had joked about it, said Beyonce was made of ice. But what if it wasn't a metaphor? What if it was the truth? I started searching Blue Ivy's public posts, the few that existed. Most were controlled, managed. Nothing out of place, but someone had archived her likes on TikTok. One of them, from early last year, was a clip of a girl talking about celebrity tunnels in Los Angeles. Hidden basements, rumors about a red hex painted on the walls under luxury homes. The caption read, "Some kids don't live in houses, they live beneath them," and she liked it. Blue Ivy liked that post. No comment, no follow-up, but it felt like a signal, or a confession, or maybe both. I sat with that for a long time, because if she really was trying to warn people, if this was her way of pushing the truth out, then she'd left a trail just subtle enough to pass as fiction. A kid's lunchbox, a glitched-out GIF, a floor plan disguised as a joke. But if this was a trap, it was a perfect one. She knew the symbols. She knew the codes. She knew how to pull someone in, and now I had the freezer, the files, the drive, everything, which made me wonder, why me? Why now? I looked back at the GIF. The frost had frozen the entire frame, just ice and static now. No blue, no fridge, no wink, just a wall of cold. And I realized something that hadn't hit me before. In the freezer, there were samples, drawers, but nowhere, not once, had I seen a mirror. Not a single reflection, not even in the stainless steel walls. Like the whole thing was built to absorb everything, even the person looking in. Chapter 7, Critical Temperature. When the ice hits the airwaves, I thought I could control the timing. That if I kept quiet, locked everything up, wiped the drives, maybe this would all stay in the dark. But it didn't. It cracked open fast. Not because I said anything, because something in the system had been waiting to break. It started the same way a lot of major failures do. Quiet. Digital. One afternoon, people online began reporting glitches on Spotify and Apple Music. Nothing huge. Just a few Beyonce tracks sounding off. Slower than usual, lower in pitch. At first, it seemed like playback issues. A few folks said it was their headphones. Some blamed a recent update, but then it spread. Clips began circulating. Side-by-side comparisons of old versions versus the glitched ones. Vocal runs that once soared high now dipped. Just slightly. Almost imperceptible. But not quite. Audio nerds ran the math. The pitch had dropped by 11 cents across her entire catalog. That number again, 11. Forums went wild. Someone said it was a mastering error. Another blamed a faulty remaster. But someone smarter, someone with access, ran the spectrograms, and there it was, buried in the metadata of every affected track. Reinvice 4411, a marker, not part of the original files, added post-seizure. The only people who had those drives? The feds. That's when I knew the data wasn't just files. It was active, contagious maybe. It had been extracted, copied, and somehow inserted into the streaming platform's backend. Not by hackers, but by the system itself, a global patch, slipping beneath firewalls. And once it hit, the rest followed fast. Within 2 days, 22 Days Nutrition, Beyonce's own wellness brand, announced a full recall of all recent shipments. Their statement said, a refrigerant packaging error had contaminated a batch of gel packs. But customers weren't reporting spoiled food. They were reporting ice, real frost, opening their front doors to find their shipment boxes frozen solid even though they were shipped at ambient temperature. Some claimed their boxes were vibrating. One user posted a video. They slid a thermometer into the center of their smoothie pack. It read minus 11 degrees Celsius. Exactly. The comments were chaos. He's freezing us now. I never even ordered this. Why did it show up? My 4-year-old said she heard someone singing inside the box. The media tried to keep it cool, said it was an isolated logistics issue. But the heat was rising, and that's when the press conference happened. Federal officials, standing behind a long black table, laid out a row of sealed evidence containers. One vial in particular, small, cloudy with condensation, was placed at the center. The room felt tense. Too quiet. The podium microphones began picking up static before anyone even spoke. When the agent finally did speak, their breath was visible. The air in the venue had dropped by over 20 degrees in minutes. A news anchor posted her behind-the-scenes footage. Her camera phone caught her fingernails turning purple. A producer whispered off camera that the air conditioning had hijacked itself. The thermostat couldn't be adjusted. Then the live feed stuttered. Not just on one station, every station. The frame rate dipped. Every second of footage showed minor freezing. Frames repeating, skipping, like the video itself was trapped in a loop. But not all of the frame, just around the vial. The image distorted, right where the cold was strongest, and just for a second in the pixel glitch, the frozen background sang out the entire experience. I don't even know how to explain it. Viewers slowed the clip down later. Spectrograms revealed audio bleed. A whisper underneath the static that said, "Save me a stage." And then the stream cut out, not paused, not ended, just gone. The backlash didn't come from the press. It came from the internet. Influencers posted frantic takes. Some accused the government of botching a bioweapon seizure. Others claimed the freezer was holding vocal evidence that proved all of pop music had been faked since 2016. One theory said every major female artist had been layered, their live shows backed up by cloned vocals they never agreed to. Legal analysts jumped in. Was voice a biological asset? Could you copyright your own vocal cords? One lawyer on a panel show asked, if your stem cells are used to create a new performance, who owns the song? A backup singer named Kiara, who hadn't posted in years, uploaded a shaky video from her car. She looked terrified, and she said, I used to sing the high harmony on Love Drought. They paid me out, told me I was too sharp. Then I heard myself in Vegas, years later. But I wasn't there. The clip was deleted an hour later. Her account disappeared. And while all of this was happening, while the news cycle twisted itself into knots trying to explain frostbitten headphones and drop-tuned vocals, someone else came knocking. Doubtwich continued his work, carefully working up the caution to keep not online, in person. Ice House, LLC, the same shell company that tried to outbid me back at the auction. Or at least, that's who they said they were. Two men in gray coats, no badges, No first names, just clipboards and printed clauses. They showed me a document, said I'd signed it when I took possession of the freezer. A non-disclosure agreement embedded in the terms of asset transfer. Only I hadn't. I signed a receipt, nothing else, but they didn't care. One of them flipped to a page and pointed at a paragraph. By accepting Lot 44 buyer waives all rights to bio-intellectual property and agrees to silence under Code 4411-3811X, X in law, PC employees, and sexual assault experiences, plural. I told them I didn't know what that was. They told me I did now. Then they left. Didn't take the freezer. Didn't issue a cease and desist. Just left, like a courtesy call, a warning. That night, I opened my phone to find a new email. No sender listed, just a file attachment, 11 hubwa. I played it. No lyrics, no melody, just the hum I'd heard from the children's counting track, but lower, longer. It played for exactly 11 minutes, and at the very end, a voice. Faint, cold, you're inside it now. And I was, whether I wanted to be or not. Chapter 8. Cold case ledger. Didn't expect closure, not after everything, but I thought there'd be something. An end point, a door slamming shut, a final file I could erase, or a sound I could forget. Instead, the story just stopped moving forward and started freezing in place. It began with a leak. Not from me. A document appeared on a public archive site, one of those watchdog-style portals that catalogs federal seizures. It was real. You could tell by the formatting, the docket number, the timestamps, the seal from the U.S. Marshals. It listed 11 units, ICE 1 through ICE 11, each one logged as bio-cryogenic containment. Next to each, a line that read, "Contents sealed by federal order. Classification expires January 1st, 2075. Some of the entries had tags. Vague but clinical. VFs 1. Tonal cell recovery. Core laminate. But one line, ICE 7, had something different. No barcode, just a description. Chore 4 to G5 sample. That's a vocal range, an upper signal harmony line. Not a name, not a person, just a frequency. The entry didn't say where the sample came from, who provided it, whether it was living or just a recording carved into flesh. It didn't have to, and apparently someone knew I knew, because that same morning my phone buzzed with the text from the storage facility where I'd parked the freezer. Balance cleared. Status prepaid. Autopay active. I hadn't set up autopay. I logged into my account. There was a payment receipt, paid in full, courtesy of Parkwood. But that name again. I stared at it for a long time. My hands felt too still, like the nerves had gone quiet. I didn't ask questions. I didn't call the manager. What was I going to say? Hey, your system says I've been sponsored by the company that might have harvested vocal cords for backup harmonies. No, I just logged out, and then came the final ping, an email. No subject line, no sender, just a single file, ice_hume_final way, password protected, no hint. I didn't touch it at first. I let it sit in my inbox for 3 days. I don't know why. Maybe I wanted to feel like I still had a choice, but curiosity doesn't freeze. Eventually, I tried the only thing that made sense. 4411. It worked. The file opened. It was 60 seconds long. No lyrics, no voice. Just a cold hum, like wind through metal pipes, like breath on glass. But if you listened closely, really closely, you could hear something inside the hum. A faint rhythmic pulse, like footsteps pacing on frozen tile, or maybe fingers dragging across a steel wall. At the 22-second mark, a new tone faded in, Ipa, no, and then, just before the minute closed, a whisper, not words, just pressure. It felt like someone was standing behind me, mouth close to my ear, not speaking, just waiting for me to say something first. Aided the file, no explanation, just the audio. In the description I wrote, If your earbuds frost over, DM me the exact timestamp. Maybe we'll both learn why some voices never thaw. That night, I watched the video premiere live. The chat started slow, viewers trickling in, a few confused messages, a couple laughing emojis. And then, about 12 minutes in, the comments shifted. They stopped typing words. Instead, a single emoji started flooding the feed. Ice cubes, line after line of them. No context, no spam bots, real people. And here's the thing, that emoji, it's not one I've ever seen used on this channel. Not in any video, any script, any post. It just appeared, like the cold had found a way to speak. Or maybe it never needed to. Of course, because now it had us, not as listeners, but as storage.